This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne Kays and Jeremy Fisher.
This is A Voice.
Hello and welcome to podcast 12. And we're in lockdown right now, both in Wales and England is about to go into lockdown. We're recording this on November the 3rd. And lockdown, of course, impacts and influences everyone. Now we have a special guest today.
Yes, can I just say,
Yes.
before I do the intro, is that there are, legions of choir leaders and performers and theatre group leaders who have gone into despair because
Yes.
we've gone back into lockdown.
Again.
And the impact, not only on the performing arts industry, but on the kind of the people who sing
Well, the
for
psyche
joy
as
and
well.
pleasure,
The psyche of the
psychological
singer.
thing.
Yeah.
It's a huge impact.
Yes.
So it seems to me that there is nothing better that I can do than to read
Do sing.
a little bit of our guests.
Our special guest today is James Sills, and he's the author of Do Sing in 2019. Gillian's just going to read a little bit out that really struck a chord with us.
Yeah, this is from chapter 7 and it's harmonise. When we sing together, we create harmony, not just musically, but in the broader sense of the word. Harmony comes from the Greek word harmonia, which means joined, in agreement, concord. And this is what it feels like to sing together. A feeling of connection, unity and fellowship. To sing together is to be part of a community. Your voice is heard. It's powerful, and there's never been a greater need for this.
James, what a great thing to write. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you both. And hear you both. Of course, we're on audio and video.
Yes.
Actually, reading that yesterday when we were thinking about, how should we lead James in, I nearly cried because you wrote that presumably between 2018 and 2019, and here we are right now in this situation. Nothing could have been more prophetic in some ways, did you but know it.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And like you say, when I wrote that, I was very much aware of the need to come together, to build community, all things that I'm sure we're going to talk about today. And then when lockdown happened and we found ourselves in the situation that we are now, there's this paradox. We need to come together even more. We need to feel that fellowship and community even more, but we can't. And so it's a very, very interesting time, isn't it? And I hadn't really reread that in the context of where we are now. But absolutely, Gillyanne, what a lovely place to start.
Well, thank you for writing the book. I think in the same chapter you quote someone who's talking about us living in an age of loneliness.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. And this,
where we don't connect with each other.
Yeah.
oh yeah, absolutely. I think it was George Monbiot who kind of coined the phrase, but we know that there's across particularly the Western world, but it's not a particular demographic or a particular age group. There is this kind of sweeping epidemic of loneliness that really worries me and concerns me, and you can see it almost at every level within society. That there's no one one particular reason, but strong communities are dissolving. People are becoming more atomized. And this is completely against our nature as humans. We are social beings. We've always been social beings. We've always come together in groups, and that's why for me that the singing experience is just so important, because not only are we coming together and we're in the same physical space, or at least we used to be, and we will be again someday, but there is so much that goes on when people are singing together in terms of bonding, and there's been so much research that kind of confirms our intuition that when we sing with other people we feel really deeply connected to them. And so it's been a complete revelation for me that same feeling can be replicated when we're singing together online, which has been the only option for the last 7 or 8 months.
I mean, we couldn't go any further without talking about sofa singers. Tell us about sofa singers. What happened?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it was the beginning of March. there was a sense that we were going to be going into lockdown very soon, and that the singing would have to stop, and and it did. And actually, singing was one of the last things that was kind of relaxed. Anyway, that's maybe a separate conversation. And so, for me, it was a knee-jerk reaction, just thinking, well, what can I do as as a vocal leader to help bring people together to sing, even when we have to be in our own homes and we can't actually be together in the same physical space. And I think it was the weekend that we saw the amazing Singing in the Streets in Italy, people singing from their balconies. I think the way it started is I think I posted about it on Instagram, and I said, can we do this online somehow? And so many people dived in and said, yes, we must, come on, James, you can do this. And so I then felt a slight weight of responsibility and, slightly giddy with excitement at the possibility. And so I then kind of committed. I said, okay, in 2 days, I'll send out a Zoom link and we'll all get together to sing on Zoom. And I'd never used Zoom at that point. I didn't really know how this was going to work. I knew that we couldn't synchronize our voices because of latency, but I thought, I just need to do something. And so, 2 days later, it was the 17th of March, 500 people, that the Zoom capacity joined me from every corner of the world. Goodness knows how everybody found out about it. And we spent an hour and a half singing Stand By Me, people joined in with their families. Afterwards, people shared songs and stories with a bit of an open mic. And we closed the Zoom session and felt elated. We felt connected. We felt hopeful, I think, at a time when people were feeling hopeless. And then, the next month was quite a roller coaster ride, really, because we were on the BBC News, it was on American TV, I was doing interviews for so many newspapers. But for me, it was just amazing that there was all this interest suddenly in singing, but not singing for the sake of singing, but singing for the sake of building community, for connecting ourselves, to support our well-being. And that very much is the theme of the book, as you know. And that's always been very much my kind of interest, has been bringing that message into more of a mainstream forum, because I think the mainstream narratives around singing, particularly solo singing, are around competing, around technicality, about can or can't. And of course that has its place. But I feel that there's more than one narrative. And so I guess, it was the kind of the dual realization that I was being able to connect people twice a week through Zoom, and for me to really enjoy that and to really, enjoy nourishing that community, but at the same time to then have a bit more of a platform to talk about singing in this way. Has been amazing and continues to be amazing.
I think reading your you do a little 9-point biography at the beginning of Do Sing, which is great, which is basically where you come from, as in how music has always been part of your life. And of course, you are still, old enough to have had singing in assembly at school, which has disappeared now. So that's always a basis for people to start with. But because of your background and your experience and the way that you work, community and health have always been really strong, and for that's still really strong in everything that you do. Talk to us about that.
It's well-being, isn't it, James? I think I want to sort of put health under that wider umbrella. Well-being. That's certainly what I've picked up from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I think about my earliest music making experiences, I can't separate them from the communities in which they were linked to. So whether it was singing with my dad on the football terraces, or whether it was singing in assembly, or when I was a bit older playing trombone in the local brass band, then when I was a bit older writing songs and trying to sing like Kurt Cobain doing Nirvana covers with my mates. This full spectrum of music making, for me, the music was almost secondary to the role that it kind of facilitated in me being part of those communities. And so I've never in my mind had a separation of the two. It's never been kind of music over here and kind of community and health and well-being over here. It's been part of the same thing. And I think maybe in the last 5 to 10 years there's been a real kind of upsurge of interest in it. And I think even the word well-being wasn't in mainstream use probably 5 or 10 years ago, and it's only obvious when you look back, isn't it? But I think for me it's always been about communal group communal music making. That's the thing that's always made me tick. I've never been particularly good at spending hours in a room practicing on my own. It's always been the joy of connecting with other people and just feeling part of that sound. For a lot of years, I felt just like I didn't really have a musical home. I played in orchestras and big bands and all kinds of different musical contexts. But I think that the common thread was making music with other people and feeling part of that sound and working with other people to create something beautiful. And I think all of those things have kind of led me to do what I'm doing now. And I think the thing that's so wonderful about the voice is that it's so democratic. It took me years and years of playing and practicing the trombone to get to the point where I could make music in a really kind of profound and meaningful and enjoyable way. And I think with singing, it can be so much more immediate. And that was a real revelation for me, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, to kind of realize that, I suppose. And there's so many things about singing as well. The fact that it has words, and that adds another level of power and connection to that in terms of emotional connection. And so it kind of felt for me, maybe 7 or 8 years ago when singing became such a big part of my practice, that so many of these threads started coming together, because all through university I had a really strong interest in music therapy. I actually thought that was going to be my kind of route, because as a music therapist you don't tend to then train until maybe in your late 20s or early 30s when you've had a bit of experience. So my loose plan was to come back to that, and I do feel very much that the work that I do does have a strong therapeutic element. Not that I would ever put that on a poster or advertise that in my marketing necessarily. I like people to come to that themselves. So, but everything you're saying about health and well-being, it completely resonates with me. And I think, as I go on with my singing work, they're the areas that I'm really, really interested in. I mean, for example, last weekend I was facilitating a workshop at a festival called the Good Grief Festival, a festival billed as a festival of love and loss. And I was leading a session there, which was designed for people to feel that community of singing together, but also use that as a space to reflect and to grieve and do whatever they needed to do through the song. And so that was a real privilege for me. But it's really interesting. I'm still relatively new into my freelance career, but to find myself in those spaces, which aren't kind of strict singing contexts, but they are kind of forums for discussing ideas around health and well-being and what it means to live, really. I mean, if that doesn't sound too grandiose.
Not at all.
It totally doesn't.
Yeah.
And, if we're not going to think about that now, in 2020, when are we ever going to think about it?
Yeah.
And I do feel it's one of the, the positive outcomes of people being forced into lockdown, that they're stopping and thinking, actually,
What's life about?
What is life about? Do I need to work so hard for this success? We've been called the more generation. We must have more of this. We must have more of that. More clothes, more money, more success. And suddenly, when that's not in front of us anymore, maybe we're looking up to the trees or the sky, or we're looking across the table to members of our family and saying, actually, this is more important. And I don't want to spend my life doing that. And I think it's a huge lesson for all of us. I mean, we've changed the way we're working.
Very much.
As a result of delivering by Zoom, the way that we teach has changed quite dramatically and in a good way. And we're not going back to teaching the way that we used to teach, whether we're in person or on Zoom.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've learned from that experience.
I think it's really interesting, because to me it makes complete sense what you've just been talking about, that your route has taken you to voice and grief, or voice and emotion, because you are aware that when we sing there is emotion involved, because if there isn't, it just doesn't mean anything. And you're dealing with strong emotions, and you're actually creating an arena where people can deal with strong emotions in a safe environment.
Absolutely.
The safe environment thing is so important, because we have so few safe environments in the world at the moment.
Well,
Sorry,
Yeah.
all I was going to say about that, sorry, Gillyanne, was that I completely agree with you there, Jeremy. And I think the lovely thing about singing is that it is a safe space, but it's not necessarily where you say to everybody, this is a safe space, let's pass around the honesty stick, and because I think there are a lot of people who would be resistant to that. Perhaps I would be, maybe, but I think there's so much that you can do in a communal singing environment if you scaffold it in the right way, if you facilitate it in the right way, if you facilitate it with compassion and with love, where you don't have to tell people what you're trying to do, but they experience it for themselves. So just as an example, I run a men's singing group called the Bevington Bitter Men, which is very much inspired by my singing with the Spooky Men's choral. And, as we know, men are underrepresented, particularly in the kind of community open access singing circles. And so I kind of wanted to create a space for men to come and sing together. And so we sing, a really broad range of music. Of course, we sing sea shanties, we sing, Georgian table songs, but we also sing really beautiful, poignant songs as well. We did a virtual choir video in the summer for a song by Graham Nash called "Simple Man," which is about vulnerability, and that then has created a space for 30 men to come together to sing about that. We're not necessarily talking about it afterwards. I know that they now are a really great informal support network for each other, but just being in the room together, sharing those words, sharing that sentiment, knowing, there's a common understanding there that we almost don't need to say anything about it if we don't want to. And I think that's really, really powerful in itself.
It's the expression of human experience.
It is, where I'd sort of, because I wanted to interject and mention that in the book you talk about find your singing tribe. And what we've been talking about in terms of community, we are hardwired as humans to connect with other people. And one of the reasons why people are experiencing stress in their lives, which leads to particularly chronic disease and chronic conditions, is because they're not doing that. And so what you're talking about really is that sense of tribal connection, even if it's never articulated as such. That's what people are experiencing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you say, we know that if you're feeling disconnected and isolated, there are so many side effects that will affect your health in a really detrimental way. So we do need to feel connected, but it's also important, I think, to feel connected to people that share something of your values, or that you see something of yourselves in other people. And I think within the group singing world, the world of kind of choirs, I think there are a lot of perhaps stereotypes that people who maybe, don't know a lot about the singing world and the choir world think that choirs might be about, choral societies. So you have to wear formal clothes and read sheet music and sing in a particular way. Or they might think that singing in a group is about what they've seen on Glee or Pitch Perfect, and they have to kind of do backflips and sing in a particular way. And of course, those are two, very valid expressions of the singing experience, but there is so much more than that. And that notion of the singing tribe, I think, I genuinely feel that there is the right singing group out there for everybody, but it might take them some time to find it, so I don't think that there's kind of one size fits all for everybody. So a little bit like, if I go back to the example of the Bevington Bitter Men, I feel like I've created a singing group that is attracting men to join that they might not have joined another group, so a lot of them have said, I haven't felt compelled to join a barbershop chorus, or I haven't wanted to join a male voiced choir, but there's something about this group that feels right to me. And that's a space that I'm really interested in as a facilitator, is how can we keep creating spaces that are bringing people into singing, where they didn't feel that they were being served before. And so this is why, I like to gently, kind of challenge a lot of the established perceptions about group singing, because, I don't know, if you think about cookery programs on TV, right? Bear with me on this. There's okay. Well, there you go. You watch all of them because there's a huge spectrum, right? There's a huge spectrum of approaches, of chefs, of perspectives, and so you probably align yourself with a particular approach or a particular philosophy. I feel that in the singing world, there's a real lack of diversity, and a real lack of kind of approaches, and so that people don't really see the full reality of what's going on out there. And I think that's partly perhaps because of TV, because they're very keen to go with jeopardy and competition, because that's what makes great TV.
Television, yes.
But for me, it's always been about the process. It's been about the process of listening and learning and growing and collaborating. And maybe that's not as easy to transmit on TV. Maybe it's not going to take the viewing ratings. But I feel if there was a greater diversity in the media, particularly on television, in the way that there is with cooking and approaches to that, I think maybe people could find their singing tribe maybe a little bit quicker. And that's the thing, really. I just feel that there is just so much to gain from singing with other people in terms of health and well-being and community, that it's a real disservice if people don't find a forum in which they feel safe to sing. I've had so many people, I run predominantly adult kind of, workshops, working with adults now. And I've had so many people who might join who are in their later years who say, I wish I'd have found this choir, I wish I'd have found a choir that resonates with me, 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on the word tribe, because tribe for some people has negative connotations in that you almost look the same. And the tribe that you're talking about it's almost like a bigger overview, which is people who are of like mind, people who have similar values, people who are looking for the same thing.
So they could come from completely different backgrounds.
Totally.
Yeah.
Gosh,
And
yes.
It's not and this is a much bigger version of family, in that you don't have to be related. There's family that you have and there's family that you choose.
Gosh, yes.
And you are looking, the tribe that you're talking about is the family that you choose.
Yeah, absolutely. And that word family, if I think about the singing communities that I'm involved with, either as a performer or as a facilitator, we very much talk about the sofa singers family, and people who are part of that talk about that. I talk about the Bevington Bitter Men choral, which is a collective of singers based in the UK and Australia. I've been singing with them since 2012. We talk about each other as our spooky family, for want of a better term. Likewise with a group I've been writing music with and performing for 10 years. And there is something about the shared musical experience that bonds you together. But if you also have that shared kind of value system, I think, everything kind of, I guess, reinforces each other, if that makes sense. So you might come together in the first instance because you have an interest in singing, and then because you find that people are of a like mind to you, and they see the world in the same way as you, that enhances the musical experience. Or it might be the other way around. You join a group because you recognise something in the people there that you align to, and then the singing deepens that. And for me, it just creates this kind of virtuous circle. And I'm just trying to find it on my phone here, because at the minute we're just writing, or I have written a Sofa Singers Manifesto, based on the feedback from the members. I cast out saying, why is it important to you? What should be in the Sofa Singers Manifesto? Oh, I've just found it. Would you like me to read it?
Oh, yeah, do.
I think this just comes to serve the point, because the Sofa Singers, we reach singers in over 50 countries of every age demographic. It's a really, really diverse group of singers, but we come together around this shared sense of purpose. So this is the best I could come up with. We come together to sing, to share our songs and our stories, raising voices and lifting spirits. We come together to sing, to synchronize our breathing, our heartbeats, and our dance moves. We come together to sing, to spark joy and human connection. We come together to sing, to feel the strength of our global community, supporting each other and our planet. We come together to sing, creating a space where everyone is valued and everyone is welcome. We come together to sing, as if to say, we are here, we are human, we are alive.
That's beautiful.
That's beautiful.
Wow. Whew.
And
I've got-
there was one thing that you've said in the book that really jumped out at me, which is linked to that, which is you talk about solo singing and you talk about choral singing. And choral singing is very much about becoming a part of something bigger. So that you're still there, you're still you, you're still contributing, but it's a bigger thing that you're contributing to, and you are a small part of it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. You know, the I dissolves into the collective, into the we. And I think I included this in the book. There's a really lovely quote from Gustavo Dudamel, who's a big kind of inspiration for me. He's an orchestral conductor, but he writes really eloquently about that shared musical experience. And he said, what a beautiful model for society. All listening to each other, working together to create something beautiful. And that's exactly what I think about when I think about choral singing. It's about the individual being part of this much bigger whole, and of course being greater than the sum of its parts. And talking about that distinction between solo singing and choral singing, there are so many people who are in my regular community choirs who will say something to me along the lines of, I've got a terrible voice, but actually we all sound pretty good together, don't we? And that's what feels like alchemy when you're in a working with a group of people who may not be particularly confident individually, but collectively there's that support.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I wanted to go next, because I'd sort of was thinking about, out of the sofa singers, we all know the term sing like nobody's listening.
Yeah.
Well, of course, that would have been the case with
It is
some
the
of
case
them.
on Zoom.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Out of the sofa singers, how many people do you think started to sing who'd never sung before? Do you think that setting up the sofa singers gave some people permission to sing? Tell us about that.
Yes, well, I think using that term permission to sing is so important, and I feel that so much of my work and the work of so many people who work in the singing world is about giving people permission to use their voice in that way, giving people permission to sing. Anecdotally, I have lots of feedback from people who have said, I'm singing around the house more, I'm singing with my family, I'm feeling more confident. I've had a few messages saying, I think I was a grumbly bass when I started, but now I feel like, a more polished tenor or something like that. And of course, like, that isn't the objective for me. It isn't necessarily to set people off on these, their own singing trajectories that might end up with them, having singing lessons or joining a choir. Like, my primary objective is to create a shared moment where we can all use our voices and to have that sense that we're doing something together, even though we can only see each other, we can't hear each other. But it will be very interesting, and I've kind of had it on my to-do list for a while to send some kind of questionnaire survey out to our members and people who've engaged with us. We have about 300 subscribers who pay a monthly subscription, and we have a very active Facebook group, and that's where people share a lot about their experience. But we have about 8,000 people on our mailing list that I send the newsletter out to, and so it will be really interesting for me to ask these questions about what has the effect of sofa singers been. Has it simply been something to look forward to doing each week, which is of course really valid in itself, or has it had a knock-on effect in terms of your kind of personal singing journey? Now, I believe we're all on singing journeys. A lot of people put them on hold or abort them completely, and that would be really interesting for me. And one thing that I do want to do, whether it will be next year or the year after or the year after that, is actually to take the sofa singers kind of model and to actually take it on the road as a live show, as a live experience.
Amazing.
And hopefully to connect with the people that I've been singing with on Zoom, but also maybe to bring people into that space. And that would be a really interesting thing, that whether to see if people make that connection between singing on their sofa at home on Zoom and then making that leap of faith to actually doing it, in person, in real life.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
I think that's fabulous.
Yeah. You've led us very nicely into
Yes.
how do you take answering a need, which is what you started with, to some form of business model with integrity?
Because clearly it suddenly became a lot of work when it took off. And it's very hard for us as creatives answering needs to then, take that step to, well, actually, You
We
know,
need to earn something.
I need to earn something. It's taking things out of me. At what point, if you don't mind saying, did you take that step, and how did you manage that transition?
So shall I answer this with in relation to the sofa singers in particular?
Yeah.
I think this is
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Wherever
because
that
then we
works
can
for you.
talk more generally if
Yeah.
we want.
Yeah, because like you say, you know, as much as this is our calling, all of us who are working in the arts, we all have to make a living as well, and so it's negating that. So I mean, there were many things that started at the beginning of lockdown where it was just a knee-jerk reaction where people just wanted to cast out and help people, you know, whether it was Joe Wicks, you know, doing his exercise classes, or I love Sophie Ellis-Bextor's, you know, Friday night discos in her kitchen and all those kind of things. And Sofa Singers was definitely part of that kind of first wave of let's just do what we can and make it fun, and you know, we're all in this together. But like you say, it suddenly becomes a lot of work. And so from the very beginning of Sofa Singers, we had a coffee donation system that I think a lot of people started to employ in lockdown. It felt important for me that people could access it for free, but then they had an option of making a financial contribution. And what I saw particularly in those first few months was, you know, people would give where they could, and sometimes it was one coffee at £3, sometimes it was 10, sometimes it was more. And for the first few months, you know, that worked really, really well. And then there came a point as the UK was starting to unlock, and we were all thinking, well, what's the future going to be for this? And I was aware that there was a lot of people who were engaging and continue to engage Sofa Singers who weren't using it as kind of a choir substitute, or, you know, as a substitute for something they have. It was actually very much valid in itself. And a lot of people were saying, well, look, I can't get out of the house anyway. You know, maybe like me, they're a young parent and it's hard to get out in the evenings when the kids are in bed, or, you know, maybe they have health issues which prevent them from getting out of the house. A whole host of people that I realised I hadn't really been serving up until lockdown happened. You know, I'm kind of kicking myself now thinking, you know, if my thing is about open access singing and creating spaces, why didn't I think of taking it into people's houses, you know, through Zoom before? And so I felt very strongly that we had to continue to, at the very least, serve those people. And also that it just felt too good for it to stop. You know, we had so many people around the world. We had these amazingly dynamic open mics where people might be sharing traditional dance from Addis Ababa, or, you know, recipes from, you know, Ecuador. And, you know, it's just amazing. This happens twice a week. It's thrilling. But like you say, we have to earn a living. You know, I'm dedicating at least 2 to 2.5 days of my time now to Sofa Singers.
Yeah.
And so it was a case of we had to lean in and say, look, okay, well, if this is going to happen, we need to have a kind of a baseline of people who are not contributing, who are paying for this. I think it's important to, you know, say that rather than, you know, we're not a charity.
Yes.
And so I set up the members club at the beginning of July, and I was really explicit saying that if you're really keen for this to carry on, we need a commitment from you financially. You know, we've got a team of three other people now who work with me on the sessions, and we're now at the stage where we do have over 300 people who are using that subscription model, which gives us a real and amazing platform of certainty. And then we still have people who join for free and then donate through Eventbrite if they can. And so it still feels important for it to be free at the point of access. But what I now say to people is, if you're joining us regularly on Eventbrite, please do consider joining the membership club, because actually then that enhances your experience, because you can then connect with people through the Facebook group. You can watch the sessions again in the Facebook group. We have one-off sessions just for the members, and so that sense of community is deepened. So I kind of see that as a win-win. And you could say I was taking maybe a bit of a risk doing that in July, because I made it really explicit, saying I want us to carry on. I think you want us to carry on, but we're going to need for it to have a baseline of financial support. And what I'm actually seeing now, as we're going back into lockdown, numbers are going up again in the members club. So I think there will be a sense that might be there might be a direct relationship to the the kind of status of our freedoms, for want of a better term. But I also think long term there will be a core of people who want to be part of it still, and I will be there to facilitate that.
I want to pick up on something that you said, which you may not have realised that you said, which is about certainty.
Oh.
Because certainty is essential for the participants, for the people who are singing. They need to know that they can be there every week, that this will be happening all the time. But what's often left out of the equation is certainty for the creator.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. It's a two-way deal, isn't it? If I'm going to be committing time to working up musical arrangements, doing writing the newsletter, doing all the admin, which I'm really happy to do. That's very much part of being a freelancer. As you have to turn your hand to so many things.
You certainly do.
But yeah, that there needs to be an element of certainty from both sides. So I'm now able to commit to that amount of time in my diary, and for me to perhaps turn down other work or to not take on other projects, because I know that there's that degree of investment from the members, which then allow me to do that. And like I say, I like to think it's a win-win. We do have bursary memberships as well, because I realise that times are very tough for people financially. And so I think about 10% of our membership are on bursary places. So, there's a sense that it's kind of funding itself in a way as well. And when people sign up to the membership, they know that part of what they're paying for is to enable other people to have that experience. And that's really important to me. And again, that's something that I'm really interested in, perhaps from a business point of view, is that idea of value and what we are able to give as practitioners in terms of value, but also how in a way, how strange it is to put a particular fixed amount of money on that, when money means different things to different people, because people are in different perspectives.
Really yes.
The whole coffee contribution thing, just as a concept, because it's like, I can afford a coffee today, or I can afford 2 coffees today. That's really nice.
Yeah. And if I think about the way I've now approached, because I'm still running my 2 big community choirs on Zoom, and so for this term, the kind of pricing structure has been a lot more kind of varied. So there was the standard terms fee, and then there was kind of a benefactor rate. Whereas if you're able to pay more, then if you do, you're then able to help subsidise people who can't afford the full rate. And I think actually that's a really healthy model for us to think about. Everything. Supporting your local cafes, or spending £2 more on a book because you can support an independent bookshop rather than Amazon or whatever. And I think that's interesting to me as well, that notion of value. And how can we navigate that in a way that works for everybody, for us earning a living and developing our businesses, but also in a way that works for people who have very different financial situations.
That is very interesting.
I want to take you somewhere completely different.
Okay. A beach in the Caribbean.
Not far off. Not far off. Talk to us about forest bathing.
Oh, okay.
Okay, just straight in?
Yep.
Yeah, go straight in.
Yep.
Okay, so forest bathing is a wellness practice. It's about nature connection, using your senses to slow down and to connect with your surroundings, particularly forest and woodland settings, and experience the raft of kind of health and well-being benefits that come with it, which includes many, many things, such as boosting immunity, reducing stress levels. I can go on and go on. And so,
I think you've been training in, isn't it, James? I've been seeing what you've been up to. It's not actually as woo as it sounds, is it? Because trees communicate with each other, don't they? They have this whole kind of little underground sort of nerve system.
yes, that's right.
And I know we discovered that during lockdown we started walking somewhere close to us at Croft Castle, and there's a forestry walk there, and we come out and go,
lovely.
oh God, we feel so much better. Why? Suddenly I saw your post about forest bathing, and I thought, oh, it's a thing.
And again, given the background that you're talking about, and also your focus, this makes complete sense to me that it's a well-being thing, and it's a group well-being thing.
Yes, and I'm glad that you say that it makes sense, Jeremy, because I'm really enjoying my training. I'm really looking forward to developing my practice, but at the same time, it feels like quite a left field turn in some ways at a time, where I've people know me, a little bit for my book, more so for Sofa Singers. James is a singing guy. Why is he taking people off into forests? But so much of forest bathing and that nature connection, there are so many parallels with my singing work in terms of well-being, but in terms of connecting to the present moment, which we haven't really talked about a huge amount, I don't think, which is such a big part of the group singing experience, is letting the endless chattering of the mind quieten and just being in the present moment, whether that's being as part of a choir or whether that's being really still in a beautiful natural setting, and just because all we ever have is a present moment, right? And we need to find ways in the 21st century to facilitate that, and whether that's yoga or meditation, we're all drawn to different things, and in a way they all draw from the same source, but there's something about that the forest bathing experience that really, really resonates with me, and takes me into a space that I want to be in, and I come out of spending time in the woods and in nature, maybe in a similar kind of mindset, that I might finish a choral singing session where I feel just more grounded, more centered, more connected to my body. Singing, as connects us with every part of ourselves, particularly our breathing, and that's very much part of the forest bathing experience as well, that you're kind of coming out of your head and into your body, and using all of your senses to explore, and also coming back to, I think, where we started our conversation, which is about this, about being human. Again, this sounds quite grandiose, but singing connects us with a very important part of our humanness, of our humanity, that we are estranged from, or a lot of us are. And we, as the human species, we've lived 99% of our lives very closely connected to nature and the natural environment, and it's only very, very recently that we've become I think we are now a predominantly urban species. I think the balance has tipped now in terms of the statistics, and so just as we are estranged from singing community, we're estranged from the natural world, and actually spending time and slowing down in nature, and not seeing nature as something that we need to conquer or move through quickly or tick off. It's not about hiking, it's not about naming plants, it's not about conquering something. It's about just being, and maybe it goes back to the thing I was saying about singing. I'm really interested in the process rather than I'm more interested in the process than the end result. So the thing with forest bathing, it's experiential. It's about the process rather than a traditional kind of ramble.
It's also about being.
It's
You're
also
talking
about
about
awareness.
being, aren't you?
It is. Yeah, exactly. And so it's going to be interesting for me to see how maybe I can bring the two different worlds together. I mean, I think at the minute I'm very much developing my practice as forest bathing as one thing, and then I'll look to see how I can bring my singing work into it. But one thing I'm already planning for next year are retreats where people can come and we can spend a weekend doing some singing, spending some time in nature, maybe exploring creativity, and it's not under the banner of singing or forest bathing, but it's just under the banner of, well, to be decided. Maybe you can help me out with my marketing there, but it's this sense of, I think it's it's connection, really, isn't it? Is what we're talking about. Connection to the voice, to the self, to each other, to nature, which I just see as really so important, like really important anyway, but particularly after everything we've been through this year.
Well, it's stop doing and start being. We're not-
Yes,
we're not
exactly.
all human doings.
No,
Well,
not
some people
true.
can
Could
be.
be,
But
yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pick up because I know before, we hit all these issues in 2020, you had been running courses for choral leaders, inviting people who were musicians or singers to come on courses and to train with you in singing leadership. Is that something you're going to continue? Because I think it's incredibly important.
Thank you for mentioning that, Gillian. Yeah, I actually only managed to run one iteration of the course before lockdown happened, and I felt, and I still feel, that very much is part of my kind of next step. Yes, it's very much. It's about, I guess, that kind of next, the next stage maybe for people who have come into the singing world and maybe are singing regularly in a choir, or maybe, I don't know, sing regularly in a folk session, or are at a school where they're expected to lead singing. And what I'm interested in is taking people to their next step. So the course is called From Singer to Song Leader.
Yes.
And it's specific, and I always try to be quite careful about the language that I use around singing. I haven't called it From Singer to Choir Master, or from singer to conductor, because there are so many contexts. This goes back to your singing tribe, but there's so many contexts where group singing happens, and not all of them, require the kind of formal training of a conductor, of a classical conductor, of a vocal animator, whatever you want to call it. And so the first time I ran the course, it was absolutely fascinating, the range of people that we had. It sold out very, very quickly, so it told me that there's obviously some kind of a need for this type of training. But there were people there from primary schools, from churches, just really enthusiastic and experienced community choir singers who wanted to maybe run groups in their own home. And for me, this feels like a really natural next step, having, empowering people to then go and lead singing in their communities in their own way, because I think so much of what we do and what you do, it's about kind of, passing the baton, really, isn't it? It's saying, look, I've got this experience and knowledge, please, take it forward. I'm not trying to have a monopoly on running all the choirs. I think there's enough people out there who want to sing, for there to be more people out there in the field leading groups. But I think it can be very, very daunting to make that step. And and it was for me. And this was, I've got my music degree and a master's and a PGCE, and I still felt inhibited to lead singing groups for the same time, maybe because I came from an instrumental background, a whole host of reasons. And so part of the singer to song leader training was that, again, that thing of permission, and just seeing across the day the kind of the confidence that people, that people really grew in confidence through that day. And it's something I'm really keen to repeat again. I'm not sure if it would work as well on Zoom, but maybe I need to put the put the feelers out there. But certainly, once we're able to come together to sing, it's something I'm really, really interested in doing. And I don't feel like I'm really stepping on other people's toes here, because there's very well established choral training routes through is it ABCD, I think, and Sing for Pleasure, and I'm sure there's many, many more, but almost all of those are based around a much longer course and sight reading and the more kind of formal trappings that aren't, if you just want to lead a few songs in your pub at the local folk night or whatever, you don't necessarily need all of that. That might be a natural next step from what I'm offering, but it feels like quite an interesting and exciting space.
Yeah, I just remember you quoting the late Sir Ken Robinson, and we're big fans as well.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you did this quote, which is about the role of a creative leader, not to have all the ideas, it's to create a culture where everyone can have ideas and feel that they're valued. Yeah. And I know that's what we aim to do when we work with singing teachers. And what you're talking about, you just said, I don't need all the work. I don't need to hold all that. What I want is to facilitate others to find where they can shine and which groups, so that they kind of find their niche. And I have to say, thinking about the forest bathing, I can see a link between those two processes, and I'm sure you will be going there in due course.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very much at the start of my journey for the forest bathing, but I think you're right. It's that sense of giving people enough for them to go out and do it for themselves, and to find out how it resonates for them and what direction they want to take it in. So part of the forest bathing is just to help people with their nature connection. Like, you're kind of forcing them, they're going to be with you for 3 hours in the forest.
Yeah.
They've turned their phone off, they're not going anywhere. But then it may well be that experience then sets them off on their own path, whatever that might be. Not necessarily to lead forest bathing, but they have had that experience, and they have the tools to then go and explore that further for themselves. And I know for myself that, I'm still doing the training now, that my nature connection is much deeper, and I know what I need to do to kind of facilitate that for myself. And that's just through me engaging with that training.
We are almost up to an hour, so
we are.
I think we need to wrap up.
Should we ask James, I mean, are there any things you would like to flag? I mean, what would you like our listeners to know about?
Well, I guess for the time being, the Sofa Singers, we sing together twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. I can't promise when it works for you in your time zone, but we do it in 2 different time slots, so we do have people in pretty much every time zone. Thesofasingers.com is where you can register and find out about the members group. We'd be delighted if you joined us.
And we'll put any of these links will go in the show notes.
Thank you very much. Of course, the book.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Gillyanne. That's available in physical form. It's very beautifully designed, just like this is a voice book. I think the design is very important. But it's also available as an audio book. It's actually on Spotify. You can do it on Spotify.
Oh, great.
It
We'll
is.
put it in the show notes,
Yes.
James. So with
Thank
the
you.
links and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just the other thing, if you're interested in the forest bathing or any of the trainings I've been talking about, or the residentials, everything goes through my monthly newsletter, which you can sign up for at my website, which is jamessillsmusic.co.uk. And so that's probably the best place. And I'm also on social media as well, which is where we often check in with each other and see what each other's up to,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
lovely.
Well, we'll put all of that in the show
social
notes.
media stuff.
Okay, thank you.
And if you have any hashtags you want us to use, just let us know.
Yeah.
Okay, I will do. Thank you.
And just to thank you to This Is a Voice, which is actually, I know James has just mentioned it, This Is a Voice is sponsoring our podcast today.
That
This is a
seems
Voice.
appropriate, doesn't it?
Yeah, 99 exercise to train and harness your voice and the power of it. And in fact, This Is a Voice, if you haven't come across it, has chapters on classical singing, contemporary singing, gospel, rock, jazz, blues.
And speaking voice as
Speaking
well.
voice,
Healthy speaking voice.
ventriloquism, mimicry, and beatboxing. Just huge fun to write that. So, and in fact, if you're looking on YouTube, it is the teal book behind
So
us.
it is, yes. Wonderful
Um,
colours.
and we are done. So thank you, James. That has been
It's been
brilliant.
an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you so much, Gillyanne.
And we'll see you for the next podcast. This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne Kays and Jeremy Fisher.